planning is one of the key M's, but given our constraints, we are not going to spend too much time on it, but I do want to give some important messages here. There are three types of media when you look at it from a strategic perspective. If you look at it from a tactical perspective, people will say media consists of newspapers, TV, digital. But when you look at it from a strategic perspective, we classify media into three types: paid media, earned media, and owned media. So any communication campaign has to decide how much emphasis to put on paid, earned, and owned. What do we mean by paid media? Paid media is what we know typically. It's your television, it's your search advertising, it's your banner advertising, it could be videos on YouTube, on your own website. So that'll be paid media. Earned media is what you earn based on what activities you do. So this could be actually you conduct an event, you may sponsor a golf tournament or a tennis tournament, and then people talk about it. Or you might have a campaign where you give out free glasses to people who can't afford it, or free shoes to people who can't afford it, and then news media talks about it. All of that we'll call as earned media. And then there is owned media. Owned media is your own website, your own company's building, your name on it. If it's at a very popular location, people drive by it. But owned is also your own product. Your product advertises itself. If you look at a typical car, the name of the car is written on the back of the car, not the front of the car. Why is it written on the back of the car? Well, people who are driving behind you can read the name. If it were written on the front of the car and you'll see it in your rearview mirror, you won't be able to read it. So owned media is not just your own website, but you're also your products and services advertising itself. I think a good, important strategic choice in media is how much emphasis will be paid on paid media versus earned media versus owned media. Once you've done that, of course, then there is a next step of the media planning process. Who are you targeting? What media channels you are using? Where you're going to spend your money? When you're going to spend your money? How much you're going to spend? All of these are technical decisions that if you have a good advertising agency, they can help you make these decisions. So this is not an area where a typical person who's taking their own product or service to the market needs to specialize in. If your advertising agency doesn't know how to do this, please find another one. But this is an area where their skill sets are strong, and you should take advantage of that. Money, the next M. Once again, there are many formal methods of deciding budgets. Here, we'll just give you some key insights. Many companies, when they are setting up their communications budget, use heuristics or rules of thumb such as, let's set our budget as a percentage of sales, or let's set our budget to match or do a little bit better than competition. All these are, as the name suggests, heuristics. They are not very good ways because they are not very purposeful. What you should be doing is what we call as use objectives and task methods. Think of what the end goal of your communications campaign is. For example, the milk campaign had a very specific goal in mind. We would like to have these many people aware of our product in these many months. You start with that end objective in mind and then work backwards from there and ask yourself how much money you need to spend to get to that objective. That's how you set a budget as opposed to percentage of sales or matching or doing something better than the competition. Advertising agencies might encourage you to set a budget that is percentage of sales so that when your sales grows, the budget grows, and when the budget grows, their fees may also grow. So you need to be very sensitive to that. So always use objectives and task method, which is start with the end goal in mind and then work backwards as to how much you need to spend. And there are formal ways to do that. Now let's talk about the last one, which is measurement. Now measurement is the last M, but I always say don't decide it last. You should decide it early on. In fact, before you spend a dime on communications, decide what measurement method you're going to use. there is no dearth of measurement methods. We have methods that cover many different areas. We can test creative strategy, we can test print advertising, we can test television advertising. We have fancy methods that are physiological methods. We can look at consumer skin responses, we can look at their eye tracking, we can do their brain testing, we can conduct cross-market tests. For digital, we have Google Analytics. So there is no dearth of these measurement methods. The problem often is it's the will and willingness to measure that prevents measurement, and it's not even the cost of measurement. For $1 that you spend on communication, even the most sophisticated method does not cost more than 1 cent on the dollar. So please decide on what the mission of your campaign is, set the measurement method in advance, and then go ahead and develop your campaign and execute it. Finally, when it comes to communication strategy, I think a good idea is to keep it simple. Your advertising agency may be more interested in winning awards, but your job is to improve the sales of your products and services. Oftentimes, winning awards is not correlated with marketplace outcomes. A very nice ad that I would like you all to see is the Meow Mix ad. Once you see it, it's on YouTube, anyone can go see it. It's very simply a cat saying meow, 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 I think more than 60 times in 30 seconds. And under that ad, you see the line which says, what is good about this product? It's a very simple execution. It is one of the most memorable ads. The day after recall of this ad has rarely been beaten. The cost of the spokesperson is nothing. It's a cat. What are some of the key principles in this particular ad? The company shows the product, mentions the brand name many, many times. Many of the advertisements you see, whether it's on digital or TV, you've seen the whole ad, and then at the very end, you see the brand name. By that time, many people have walked out, engaged in something different. This particular ad mentions the brand name many, many times. It states all the positives about the product. It shows the product in use, avoids any unpleasant connection with your product, and it also tells people where and how they can buy it. It's never won any award, but the day after recall of this ad in terms of people's recall of the brand name has been one of the highest. So a quick summary of what we covered in this module: align your communication strategy with your positioning and all the elements of your marketing mix. A great communication campaign is a key element to your marketing plan, but it is not all of it. Once in a while, it may help you sell what you can make, but it will do wonders if you make what you can sell. And again, define mission and metrics before spending even a penny on your advertising and communication strategy. So even though measurement is the last M, you should be deciding it along with your mission and not execute your advertising before you combine both the mission and the measurement. All companies, all businesses have to make a pricing decision. Pricing is one of the 4 key P's that Professor Khan discussed earlier in her opening module. So first, let's talk a little bit about the importance of pricing and why pricing is a key driver of profits. This study was done by McKinsey many years ago, and we replicated it in our book, Smart Pricing, more recently using data from Words, which is a Wharton data service. So what this study does is it looks at the improvement in your bottom line if you were to change or improve either your fixed costs, your sales volume, your variable cost, or your price. So think about it as the following. Let's say we were to look at all S&P 500 companies in the US and create a combined income statement of all 500 companies. So once we have that combined income statement, we say, okay, if these companies were to lower their fixed cost by 1%, what would happen to their operating profits? And the answer is they will improve by 2.3%. What if these companies could increase their sales volume by 1%? What would be the response on the bottom line? It'll be a little more than 3%. What if these companies could reduce their variable costs by 1%? What would be the impact on the bottom line? Well, close to 8%. What if these companies could improve their price by 1%? What would be the impact on the bottom line? And the answer is close to 11%. So if you look at all the levers or drivers that are available to a manager, improving your pricing has the biggest impact on the bottom line. We have known this for a while, and many good managers have known this for a while. But now you combine it with the next piece of data. When it comes to managers' perceptions as to what they are better informed about, what do they focus on? Well, if you look at variable cost, that's the highest thing people focus on. Number two is fixed costs. Number three is comparative prices. And then when you look at pricing, those numbers are much lower than the first few numbers. So what does that mean? Even though people realize that pricing is one of the most important drivers, their knowledge about how to use and execute on pricing is limited and can be much better. I think this highlights the importance of all of us learning a little bit more about pricing and becoming better pricers. There's a very nice Russian proverb that I often share with my students in the class. There are two kinds of fools in any market: one who charges too much and the other who charges too little. Now, there are many ways to interpret this proverb. One way to interpret this is, well, everyone's a fool because nobody can be charging the exact right price. There's another way to interpret this proverb, which I think is a more appropriate way. What it's really trying to say is that good pricing is a balancing act. And in order to achieve the right balance, we need to be cognizant of a number of different areas. We need to understand economics, because pricing is about economics. We also need to understand psychology, both consumer psychology as well as psychology of people who make pricing decisions, because human beings make pricing decisions and human beings respond to pricing decisions. In this age, and also in any other age, the knowledge of statistics is very important. You need to be able to manage data. You need to be able to analyze data. You need to have a good understanding of operations research, which means you need to learn how to optimize given some data. These days, you need some basics about computer science. And you also, more importantly, need a lot of courage, because good pricing decisions are not made by changing the price. They are made by changing the pricing strategy in a company. And also, good pricing requires common sense. So it's a combination of all these various areas that help us improve our pricing decisions. Price elasticity. In this module, we'll focus on this particular aspect in more detail. We'll do it in two parts. In the first part, we'll think about what drives price sensitivity or price elasticity. In other words, under what conditions are consumers more or less price sensitive? If we know this, we get some useful directional guidelines on when to price higher and when to price lower. The next part of this module, we'll talk about formal methods of measuring price elasticity. And of course, before we do that, we'll define formally what price elasticity means. So let's start with the first one, drivers of price sensitivity. These are things we know from previous research and previous observations and are fairly robust findings. So what are the things we are going to focus on? We are going to focus on 7 different drivers of price sensitivity, starting with availability and awareness of substitutes. I think it's not very complicated to recognize that if your product has more substitutes, people will be more price sensitive. So this is very straightforward. More substitutes that exist, greater will be the price sensitivity. What is important is it's not just the availability of substitutes, even awareness of substitutes matters. So for example, I live close to Philadelphia, I work in Philadelphia, so I know a lot of restaurants in Philadelphia. So if I'm price sensitive about where to eat, I have good information of various restaurants, their prices, I'll be more price sensitive. But if I go on a vacation, let's say I go on a vacation to Paris or another city which I'm not very familiar with, I don't know many restaurants there, I'll be less price sensitive. Probably there are more restaurants in Paris than there are in Philadelphia. So there are more substitutes available in Paris, but my price sensitivity in Paris is going to be lower because I'm not aware of all of them. Another important concept to keep in mind is it's not just availability and awareness. How easy it is for us to make direct comparisons makes price sensitivity higher or lower. So let me give you an example from my own research. I do a lot of work on private labels and generics. Professor Khan talked about private labels earlier also in her module. Private labels command a very high share in the US market, not just because they are priced lower than major national brands, but because they are kept right next to major national brands on the same shelf. So consumers can easily see that a national brand, say Tylenol, costs this much, and acetaminophen produced by Walmart or sold under the Walmart name costs much less. And they are kept right next to them. So many people choose the store brand. Think of the following scenario. Suppose all these store brands were put on a separate shelf in the store, just like generics were put on a separate shelf many years ago in some stores. If all the private labels of various categories were taken out and put on a separate aisle in another part of the store, one of our papers that we did for a company indicated that the share of private labels will fall by 10%. So it's not just the availability of private labels, it's our ability to compare the private label price with the national brand in a very easy way that increases our price sensitivity. So availability of substitutes, awareness of substitutes, and then how easy it is for us to compare the price of one product against another. And even small changes there make a big difference in price sensitivity. Another important driver of price sensitivity that we've observed is what is the total expenditure on the product, and also what is the total expenditure on this product as a fraction of your total costs. So let me give you examples of both. If you spend more on a product or a service, you're going to be more price sensitive. Bigger families are more sensitive to the price of groceries. Why? Because for a bigger family, their expenditure on groceries is a bigger part of their budget. So they are more price sensitive. So if you spend more on a product or a service, you are usually more price sensitive. What is also interesting is the same product, if it's a bigger part of your cost structure, you will be more price sensitive. But if it's a very small part of your cost structure, you will be less price sensitive. So let's say if I'm making a steel furniture, I'll be more sensitive to the price of steel than somebody who makes wooden furniture and uses steel nails. Now, steel is still steel, but the cost of nails as a fraction of the total cost is much smaller for somebody who makes wooden furniture as compared to the price of steel that goes into steel furniture. So even though we have the same metal steel, the person who's more price sensitive to the steel is the person who makes a steel furniture as opposed to the person who makes wooden furniture. Now, this one's not very surprising. If somebody else is sharing a part of the bill, you are going to be less price sensitive. So people observe this, that if your company is paying for your airfare, you'll probably not search as much for a lower cost flight. How do you tackle that? Well, you may want to give your employees some incentive in terms of some shared benefit if they are finding a lower price. Another example is when your pharmaceuticals or the products that you buy in a pharmacy, when they are covered by insurance, you are likely to be less price sensitive. So how do companies encourage people to become more price sensitive and buy the cheaper product? If you go through the insurance company and lower the price, let's say if a drug costs $100, insurance company pays 80%, you pay only 20, you are going to pay 20, and the insurance company picks up 80. All right. Well, if you lower the price from 100 to 50, what will happen? You will pay 10 instead of 20. Who's getting the biggest advantage? It's the insurance company. But if you can give a direct to consumer discount, then the consumer sees a bigger benefit of that discount. So whenever you have shared expenses and you want the consumer to actually be more price sensitive, you give a direct to consumer discount as opposed to lowering the price of the product directly. Your switching costs affects price sensitivity. So if I already have a big car, a big SUV, for example, I have a V8 SUV that I've owned for 10 years. It still works well, so I don't change it, even though my kids tell me to buy a new one. But because I already have a big SUV, when the price of gasoline increases, I still fill it up. I'm not very price sensitive to it. Even though I want to be, I have no choice because I get only 15 miles per gallon. If I were able to change my car, then I would become more price sensitive. But I'm stuck with a particular car or a particular SUV in this case. So when the price of gasoline changes, my behavior doesn't change. I still have to go to the office every week, every day of the week. I pretty much go 6 days a week. So I still consume as much gasoline as I did even when the price was lower. An area that is also important to think about is price quality relationships. There are many product categories where consumers infer the quality of the product from the price. So many people say perfumes is one example of that. Let me give you some more examples that may be even more relevant. Consulting services, legal services, choice of a doctor, financial advisors or retirement planning. In all these cases, what we find is people infer quality of the product from the price. Why is that? What's the common driver? The common driver here is consumers' lack of knowledge about the product or the service. I don't know who's the best legal professional because I don't use them very often. But if I have somebody who's really cheap, I might infer from their lower price that they are not very good. Whereas somebody who charges a lot may be better because why? Because if other people are willing to pay more for them, they must be good. I'm not very knowledgeable about this service. And if I find that the market is willing to pay more for them, they must be good. And this is consumers' lack of knowledge that drives price quality relationship because the cost of error is very high in all these settings. Price quality relationships happen in other areas too with a very similar kind of an idea. The same wine, when priced differently, people think that the wine that is more expensive is better. Again, this happens more with novice wine drinkers as opposed to knowledgeable wine drinkers. Knowledgeable wine drinkers will not show as much price quality effects as novices. And by the way, we have seen many studies which are brain scans where for novice drinkers, you see this effect very strongly. Another area that affects consumers' price sensitivity is their ability to carry inventory. If a consumer can buy in advance for future consumption, they can take advantage of lower prices, they become more price sensitive. If a consumer is not able to carry inventory, for example, say products like milk, fresh vegetables, where you can't store them for a long time, people are less price sensitive because when the product is on sale, you can't buy it for the next month of consumption. Whereas for cereal and many other products, people find that if the product is on sale, people buy a lot more of it because they can store the product for future consumption. So these are some of the instances where we see people becoming more or less price sensitive based on the scenario they face.